I'm a good papa. That's what my mother told me, and that's what I believe. I was born during the warm months and lived with my mother and litter until the cold white blanket fell from the sky. That's when the men in the screaming and flashing cars had come and taken us from our mother and our home. They had brought us to a bigger and brighter place with cold, hard floors and wire cages, and one by one my litter mates were taken by humans. I was the last one taken, and when I whined in the night, they put me with Boney, a huge and skinny dog who was lame in one leg. Boney was my friend, and I followed him around and slept beside him too. Boney was sick though. Something wrong inside of him, hurt him, had made him lame, and it was growing. He whined in the night too from pain, not loneliness. I would lick his face and his tail would wag, but I knew there wasn't anything I could do to help him. And sometimes, when he'd cry out in the night, I would whine softly as well, though quietly, so I wouldn't wake him. Because I was a good boy. My mother had told me so. One day, after Boney had whined all night, the woman in the white coat had opened our cage door. I put a leash on him. Her eyes were wet and running, which we'd seen before. Boney had told me that when she came into our area with wet eyes and led a dog away, would never see it again. Boney said the wet eyes meant she was filled with sad and bad feelings, and that she had to do something she did not want to do. When I saw her put the leash on Boney, I was filled with bad feelings too, and I barked and threw myself against the cage. But she ignored me and dragged Boney away, as his kind dark eyes had rolled with fear and pain. Boney never came back. One day, a strange man had come and looked at us. People came all the time and looked at us. And sometimes they took one of us away to live with them. Boney told me that we had to be friendly, run towards them, wag our tails, and bark for attention. Boney said that young dogs like me were usually snapped right up, but that people sometimes didn't like dogs like me when we got too much older, and that the bald healing patch on my neck was probably why I hadn't been taken those first few months. Boney has said the hair would grow back, and that if I was a good boy, a friendly dog, someone would take me eventually if I didn't get too big. Finally, someone did. That strange man all by himself with hard hands that tasted of salt and meat. He rubbed my head briskly, his hands heavy against my clipped ears, which were still sore, though they had long since healed. He put his fingers in my mouth too, and felt my legs.
"Good boy,"
he said.
"Good boy."
But he seemed to be saying it to himself, and his eyes and smell were hard to read. I was happy though, excited to be chosen at last, happy to be taken away from this place with its barking dogs, wire cages and strange rituals that took my friends away when they got old and sick. And as we left that place, I wagged what was left of my bobbed tail furiously, and I happily jumped into the back of his strange-smelling boxy car, with its dark windows and soft, odd-smelling mattress. I liked my new home. The house was huge and dark, and I shared it with a half-wild cat that didn't seem interested in being my friend at all. I had a small door I could squeeze through if I had to go outside. I was fed a lot of raw meat, and I loved the cat and my human too, though he wasn't very friendly, and he wasn't home very often. My favourite times were when the man would take me to the park and let me run up to certain people if they were alone. I'd jump up on them, and they would pet me, and I would lick their faces, and they would laugh, and then the man would come up behind them with a piece of strong-smelling cloth, and he'd put it against their smiling faces, and they would grab at his hands and then collapse. He'd then tie their hands and feet and cover their mouths and put them in his car and tell me I was a good boy, and I'd ride in the front with him while they rolled around in the back, making muffled noises. I was lonely in the house when the man was away, and excited that we had new people in the basement. But time after time, the man just took them downstairs into the dark basement and they would never come up again. Sometimes I would hear strange noises, and I would feel uneasy, and I'd hide behind the sofa, hiding from the noises and the cold, glowing eyes of the cat who crouched in the shadows, chuckling to itself as its tail wagged in that odd way that it did. Last night we went to the park and I saw a small human.
Go get her, boy.
The man had breathed into my ear as he unleashed me. I ran towards the small human, wagging my stump of a tail so hard that my whole back end swayed. And the human had initially looked afraid, but had then broken into a huge smile and hugged and petted me.
Are you a good boy? Are you a good boy?
She had asked as she laughed, an odd sound humans make when they are happy. My owner never laughed though, but he looked happy as he stepped up behind her and slipped the cloth over her face. Her eyes had widened, and then, before they closed, I saw it, the moisture running out of their corners. The same thing I had seen in the eyes of the woman in the white coat when she had led Boney away for the last time.
It means that they are filled with sad and bad feelings.
Boney had said.
It means they are doing something they don't want to do.
I felt strange. As we drove home, I could hear the human in the back rolling around and making sounds that sounded like whimpers. And I could still see her wide eyes, shocked, afraid, and starting to run with water. The water that meant she was filled with bad feelings, and I whimpered softly to myself. But it was drowned out by the sound of wind blowing through the car windows, the sounds coming from the back, and the low mumbling of the man talking to himself as his large, hard hands squeezed the steering wheel, again and again and again. That night I heard sounds coming from the basement. I hid behind the sofa, whimpering softly to myself, feeling strange, feeling bad.
Why are you crying, you fool?
The cat had hissed, his eyes glowing like small moons out of a darker patch in the gloom.
She's just prey for the man to play with and food for us to eat. No different than the others you helped the man bring home.
The cat's low voice dripped with contempt and something like hatred, despite the fact that its tail was wagging and that it was vibrating with a deep, self-satisfied purr. I didn't reply back, though I felt a sick feeling spreading inside me, a darkness growing that made my legs feel weak. Was this the pain that made Boney whimper in the night? The thing that made his leg lame? The feeling ate away at me as I hid there, and all night I whimpered like Boney had, as the cat prowled around the house, purring and laughing softly to itself. The next morning when the man left, I nosed open the basement door and I descended into the darkness as the cat padded softly behind me. We were forbidden from coming down here, but that had never stopped the cat and wouldn't stop me now. We navigated by sense of smell, and it smelled bad, like the place I had come from, fear, desperation, and other things as well. We found the small human, bound, hand and foot, with her mouth covered. In the faint light I could see that her eyes were wide with fear, and as I licked her face, moisture poured out of them. I knew what I had to do, and I chewed at the ropes that bound her, and it took hours to free her hands and feet. And when the ropes finally parted, she threw her arms around me, and I felt the water from her eyes, hot against my neck. The cat watched us silently, with something like hate in its glowing eyes. When she was free, I led her out of the dark basement, tugging at her sleeve, and she exited through the small doggy hole and tried to take me with her, but I stayed, because I am a good boy, and the cat and I watched as she raced across the yard and disappeared into the tall, dark woods around the house.
You fool!
The cat hissed.
You stupid fool!
Then it padded away, disappearing into the shadows that were gathering in the corners of the room and spreading through the empty house. And as I returned to the basement, to the small room with the odd smells and discarded ropes, to the damp mattress and the darkness, because I knew the man would be home soon, and that he'd go downstairs and see what I had done. There was no escaping it, and I was a good boy, and I would not hide. I descended into the darkness that smelled like meat and fear and blood, I retraced my steps through the dark rooms until I found the place where the small human had been, where all the humans I had distracted and befriended had been bound. I sniffed at the chewed-up ropes, at the stains, then I lay down. But I was not hiding, and I was not cowering. I was crouching, and I was waiting. Because I never told you why my mother had told me I was a good boy, did I? She had told me that as I laid panting beside her, bleeding from my raw and torn throat, unlike my fathers and brothers, I had refused to fight the other dogs that the screaming men had pitted me against. I had refused to fight back, and a bigger and more vicious dog had torn at my throat and ripped hair and skin away. I had went limp, and my owner at the time had cursed at me and kicked me, and had dragged me away and threw me back into the cage I shared with my mother. And she had licked my wound as I had laid there panting, bleeding and whimpering. She told me that I was a good boy for not fighting back, a good boy for not sinking my teeth into my enemy's throat, a good boy for not being the killer that humans wanted me to be. Now I am waiting here in the darkness, thinking about what that man had me do, thinking about his exposed throat, the delicate bones and the hot blood rushing beneath his soft, thin skin. I am excited for him to return, because I am no longer his good boy, and I can't wait to show him what I can do.